Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now today, I want to explore the increasing focus on automation and its impact on results versus people. And also the impact of open source software and its focus on agility and faster decision making. And maybe, just maybe, we can bust a few myths and misconceptions along the way. And today's guest is Rob Hirschfeld, founder and CEO of a company called RackN. Now, Rob has been in the cloud and infrastructure space for 20 plus years, and he's done everything from startups working with ESX betas to serving 4 terms on the OpenStack Foundation Board and an executive at Dell. And as leader on the 2030 cloud, he believes that the technology of running data centers and applications on cloud is just a small part of the bigger story. Speaking of stories, I'm going to ask him to share his too. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Austin, Texas, where Rob Hirschfeld is waiting to join us in conversation today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Neil, it's really exciting to be here. I am Rob Hirschfeld. I'm CEO and co-founder of RackN, is a infrastructure automation company. So we help customers who want to build automation in what we see as sort of this next generation way, really looking at infrastructure as code and making it collaborative and reusable and modular. And it changes the way people look at how they approach infrastructure in general and making a single control plane, if you will, of all their different types of infrastructure, cloud, edge, or on premises.
And I think most people now, they will go out and buy gadgets and buy new technology, buy new software, whether they're at home or they're in a big business. And we seldom think about infrastructure. And most people have got the same network infrastructure, the same home route, and no one really pays any attention to all that infrastructure. So my question to you is, can you share your origin story? Where did your passion for that infrastructure come from? And what was it that put you on this path you're on now?
Oh, it's a great one. I've been interested in infrastructure for a long time. I have an engineering and an industrial engineering background. And my first real job where I was being a consultant on my own, I was writing software and I was all excited. And what I found was, and this is the late 90s, deploying that software and actually getting it into the field was remarkably hard, like eye-bleedingly hard. It took me as long to deliver and install the software as it did to write the software. And that was just, that was not going to be an acceptable thing. And that, without realizing it, started me down this operations path. The outcome of that was actually a startup I founded with Dave McCrory that we literally built the first cloud. We have a patent for the cloud back in 2001. And in that iteration, we're actually trying to figure out how do we deploy software more effectively to people. That was Citrix and web, very early web tech. And then how do we make it so that's easier for everybody, which is what our initial cloud offerings were. And then with RackN, we were all at Dell. So the founding team was at Dell together with this mission all the way from the top to ship clouds from the factory. We wanted to, literally roll them into a truck and ship them. And that turned out to be remarkably hard to do. And what we ended up doing as a founding team and what RackN really sets out to do is make clouds that build themselves. Sort of flip the script entirely on that.
Love that. And of course, it was that path that led you to RackN. And I've got to ask you, that not long after then, or maybe along that journey, you became a strong advocate for lean and agile processes. Where did that come from?
The industrial engineering that I studied, which was about lean manufacturing and the processes by which we look at theory of constraints and how do we improve that process, really tied directly into lean and agile as I started coming up. Now, I was very lucky to be collaborating with people who understood the process and sort of the people and the teams and how those mechanisms work. But much more broadly, I looked at how we were trying to deliver software. And this idea of theory of constraints and rapid testing and having everything connected as an integrated system really appealed and made sense as far as how we should deliver software, and really transformed to me, the whole industry is transformed by looking at, in development terms, CI/CD and development pipelines, where you're connecting things together, you're being able to bridge more like in a supply chain for code delivery. And we're actually now applying those same processes to what we call infrastructure pipelines, where we're using automation to do this end-to-end integrated delivery process. So very focused on that sort of lean concept.
And before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a little bit of research on you. And one of the things that stood out for me was your belief that developers are often developing infrastructure incorrectly. Is that something you can expand on?
I'd be happy to. So we have this really interesting, to us exciting concept coming in called infrastructure as code. And infrastructure as code, people get excited because they look at like Git and immutability, using tools like Terraform or Ansible to build something. And they get very excited about the idea that I can sort of write an input file, run an execution, and then deliver system. And while that's really useful, it's an amazing set of technologies, what we're missing here is the thing that we've learned in development and CI/CD pipelines, which is we really need to be building modular and reusable components. We need to have collaboration, and the systems that we're using should encourage collaboration and reuse and integration between the components. And so when we look at infrastructure as code, our first question is not, can I put it in Git, or can I use that Git file to set something up? It is much more about how does that one part of the process connect to other parts of the process? And then how can the work that we do to automate something be reused over and over again? That really is our driving focus, is to eliminate the toil because frankly, we do a lot of bare metal. One of our specialties is bare metal infrastructure. And nobody in any company ever said, I am generating value for my company by setting the BIOS of a server correctly. They have to do it. It's necessary work, but it never creates value. And so we look at things like that, high toil, and ask, how do we make this something in a piece of code or automation that can be reused over and over again? And if that's not your first question when you're writing automation or any piece of code, then I really do think you're looking at it wrong.
And I'm glad you mentioned automation there, because here we are in 2022. 2 years ago, automation was almost seen a bit of a dirty word in business. But now, as you just eloquently pointed out there, nobody's ever thought that tweaking the BIOS of a server or anything delivered value. And we want to be concentrating on value-add activities and making data-driven decisions now. So with the increasing focus on automation, can you expand on its impact on results versus people? I know it's a big topic, but I always like to think that if we put new technology in, we can free up people to get them to do those value-add activities, but often it can be at the expense of jobs. And I think attitudes have changed now, but I'm curious what you're seeing in every industry, really.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And some of this, to me, bubbles up in how people think about complexity.
Yeah.
And so I want to sort of go back and talk about the complexity problem here. The challenge we have with automation is that the systems that we're automating are complex. And one of the things that RackN did as sort of a founding principle that was really important is we recognize that complexity isn't bad, that heterogeneity is normal. And then, so instead of building systems where we go around trying to eliminate complexity or eliminate variation, what we actually do is we look at ways that we can say these systems have necessary complexity and have required variation. And how do we absorb that into some standard processes and practices? And the thing that gets in where people get confused about this is a lot of times they look at a system and they are like, all right, I'm just going to ignore a whole bunch of that complexity and focus only on what I have to do to get it done, right? They're very focused on their efficiency and how they improve. And the theory of constraints, right? My industrial engineering theory of constraints says if everybody focuses only on their efficiency and making themselves productive and efficient instead of looking at the system, then we end up with a really broken system. But which is a people problem even more than a tech problem.
Yeah.
But unwinding all that all the way back, as we start to build automation, what we do is we solve our problem, our unique systems, our unique components. It's very hard for people to solve problems that are outside of their scope. And what we've done as an body of automation, is we've built a whole bunch of stuff that only works for each company. And what we know with RackN, because our mission is to eliminate that, is that 99% of that is the same, right? People are solving the same problems over and over again, but in ways they can't share back the work that they've done. And when you talk about automation, it's supposed to eliminate work and toil for people.
Yeah.
But if you write automation that only eliminates your toil without a thought to how other people could be benefiting or solving the same problems, then ultimately what you're really doing is you're not reducing your workload at all. You're adding your workload or making you more indispensable, which actually just never makes you more indispensable. It makes you locked into what you're doing. And so for companies that actually want to have their people on the most productive tasks possible, what you really want to be doing is finding out what those common elements are and finding ways to make them repeatable and easy to use and easy to understand, so that as people build automation systems, they're actually not creating custom automation or unique automation. They're creating reusable modules that they can stitch together. And to me, that's something we've been missing. And we don't measure our work on how well I've reused components in the ops space. In development, it's totally different. Developers are like, I pulled in, except for Log4j, maybe, we look at it as, that's a whole nother piece to this, but we look at it as, oh, I didn't rewrite something. I found a library that did the work for me, and I incorporated it into my code, and everybody celebrates that. Yeah. I wish we did that as much, and what RackN's trying to help people do is celebrate when that happens in ops and automation.
Absolutely, 100% with you there. And I think something else that we've changed the way we work and the way we think about work and think about automation. And I think we're also changing how we think about collaboration as well. So can you expand on the impact of open source software and that focus on agility and faster decision making? Because again, it's a huge topic now, isn't it?
It is. Open source is really important in the licenses that it has, but actually I see the value, and I was doing a lot of open source work. I was on the board at the OpenStack Foundation for multiple years, sort of during the peak of that, and that sort of wraps up in some of RackN's Dell origin stories. We built the first OpenStack installer, something called Crowbar back in the day, that was the genesis of a lot of what RackN does today. But when you look at open source, it's fundamentally about collaboration. Right? There's a whole bunch of stuff about the license, and we can have an hour-long commercial discussion about commercializing open source and things like that. But the places where open source works really well are the places where people are collaborating around a body of code, right? Mm-hmm. And in that, there are processes and communication and reuse that allows a community to actually work together, share, and build on top of each other's work. And people need to understand it's not just and shouldn't just be about using free software. It really ends up being about how do you collaborate around something that has a high degree of reuse and portability, and sort of open yourself up to the idea that somebody else is going to, get use out of what you've done and hopefully be able to contribute back and continue to reuse it. That takes a different mindset, which is it's an open source, it's a collaborative mindset. And it actually takes a lot of tooling that people overlook, because you can't take those collaborations if you can't test that they continue to work for the community at large. And I think this is a place where people overlook the role that vendors play and companies play in helping ensure that as we have this sort of ecosystem that's building around open source technologies, that they continue to be working and integrated and accessible to everybody, because that's not something the individuals in the communities do. As a rule, it actually comes back to the maintainers.
And here we are chatting at the beginning of a new year, and a lot of teams are going to be looking at doing things differently and maybe looking for greater control, consistency, and maybe choice over their infrastructure. And if we just introduce RackN here, I know your digital rebar platform helps create reusable standardized processes for platforms and infrastructure teams, actually enabling self-management and control at scale. But just to bring that to life for people listening all over the world in different industries, I'm curious, do you have maybe a use case that you could possibly share that would just help people listening the kind of value that you offer and the problems you could solve in their world too?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, boy, our largest customer, which is using 20,000, they RackN is software, so they're running the software. We don't do it for them.
Yeah.
They run digital rebar in their data centers on a global scale, and they use the infrastructure as code pieces to allow them to replicate basically the automation to bootstrap their data centers globally. It's a financial services company, and their mission, their vision with what we do is they need to be able to reset a data center from scratch in an hour, right? So imagine a ransomware attack or a data center weather event or something like that takes a data center offline permanently. How do you rebuild that infrastructure in a day? And what we got involved in doing is saying, all right, well, you have to seed that. You have to build all the servers, you have to patch them, install all the software, you have to build that whole stack up. And through Digital Rebar and the way we do this end-to-end infrastructure as code, we actually can create an immutable system where you drop in all of those pieces. You can test it. You can put it through environmental testing. You can rehearse it, but literally drop it in and then build the data center up from nothing. And they do that actually for all their data centers when they bring up new infrastructure. And that's been a remarkable achievement, right? That used to be weeks of manual effort, errors, a lot of very fragile processes that literally just now happen when systems arrive on site. And even more, and this is where it gets fun, they have a process they call repaving. And so instead of looking at elaborate patch processes and change management and things like that, they can take that same process and run through a repaving where they can take racks of gear and say, it's time for us to go through a repave process and rerun it. It takes about an hour and rebuild all that infrastructure from scratch back into its new desired state. And so they can do that for patching, they can do it for rollouts, they can do it just for conformance and reporting or standardization. And it completely transforms how you look at infrastructure when you realize that you can do this end-to-end process, eliminate all of the fragile manual steps and all the error-prone pieces that go into that, and just restart the process. And it transforms. It was interesting because it started from a day zero process, but it's now a day two process. It's an ongoing development process. And that work, the way we've done that for them, actually works in any infrastructure, whether it's edge, we work with some telcos for that, whether it's a CI/CD system, we work with media companies and gaming companies that are doing very CI/CD intensive reset of rebuild environments type of thing. That same infrastructure as code mentality really is industry agnostic from that perspective.
And I'm curious, from all the conversations you've been having with your customers and clients all over the world there, we're at the time of year that we're looking at trends and what trends might dominate. Are there any particular trends that you're seeing from the kind of questions that people are coming to you and asking for your help with? Are there any big trends there?
This is a place to bring back the complexity topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really see people struggling with complexity. And they're really caught because the desire to have hybrid and multi-cloud and variation in their supply chains, right? Supply chains now are like, we help our customers have multiple hardware vendors or multiple cloud vendors where they're like, all right, I can't take the risk that one of my major clouds is going to start having regular outages. Maybe I should start shifting my workloads, or I want to put a reverse auction together and save money on the hardware vendors, or a certain vendor just can't get servers anymore and I have to shift because I just need the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Those are really real problems. But that type of heterogeneity causes a lot of complexity because you now have to adapt to all of those different environments, right? The clouds are very different. The hardware vendors are very different. So they're starting to ask, how do I manage complexity? It's not an acceptable answer to hire people. There just aren't enough people to do it with specialties in each one of these things. And they don't want to be able to do that. They want that consistency over top of it. So they're adding complexity. The question is how you manage that complexity in the mix of that, right? What processes can you go through?
And you know what my next question is going to be. As you're planning for the year ahead, how are you helping your clients reduce that complexity?
So what we do for them is we help connect things together. So the way to eliminate complexity, or can't eliminate it, reduce it or manage it, what we actually like to say is tame it, is you have to be able to let individual systems run in the way they're designed to run. That's the first thing. Is having a variety of tools isn't bad, but use them in the ways they're supposed to be used. If you use them outside of their lane, you can actually add a lot of complexity by making something do what it wasn't designed to do. And then you have to be able to connect those together. So it's that connective tissue, that infrastructure pipeline, where you can feed information from one tool to another tool to another tool in a seamless way. And that's really what we're helping people do, is that you look at how the systems are coupled together, you standardize that coupling, you automate that coupling so that it runs seamlessly between them. And between those steps, what you've actually done is you've shown how the system works together, that assembly line, if you want to think about it, or just the way, what some people are calling work stream management, the way you have work streams going through. If you understand those work streams, you have actually reduced the complexity because they won't catch you by surprise. You won't be like, oh, wait a second, this region of a cloud went down and I have 5 things that depend on it or 1 thing that depend on it, but that broke everything else in my system. It's understanding that interconnectivity that is actually the thing that is eliminating the complexity cost, the complexity tax, more than just taking things out of your system.
Love that, and love chatting with you today. A beautiful moment to end on. But before we do, we've come full circle here because we started the podcast talking about your origin story and what put you on this path. But I'm now going to have a bit of fun with you and ask you, what was the soundtrack to that origin story? What song inspired you or helped you in your career, or just helped you get your head in the zone before going on stage, or remind you of technology? What would your song be and why? And we'll add that song to our playlist.
Oh, this is a very period thing based on when RackN was really being formed. I spent a lot of time listening to Everything is Awesome, which was that Lego movie soundtrack, right? And this is sort of the heyday of us building these automated systems and really being excited about what we could build and how everything would fit together. And it's amazing from that perspective. But yeah, that upbeat, sort of really positive, cheery, like it's going to be amazing. And then understanding the other side, that ops requires you to do real work. And there's another side that you don't get to see in infrastructure, as you were alluding at the beginning of the podcast. Everything is Awesome sort of encapsulates both sides to me of that journey.
Well, I think you've got a dark, sinister side there, because I'm going to add that to our Spotify playlist and then infect that earworm with people listening all over the world, because it's one of those songs, once it's in your head, you can't get it out. But for everyone listening, if they're interested in anything we talked about today, wants to dig a little bit deeper on any of those topics, where's the best way of finding RackN online, contacting your team if they've got any questions, or even reach yourself? What's the best way of doing that?
So for RackN, it's RackN.com. And we've been posting a lot about infrastructure pipelines and complexity management, and it's really actionable stuff. And even doing it yourself, we are a software company, so we encourage people to download and try. The simplest thing for us to do is have people use the software, not listen to me tell them how great it's going to be, but actually experience it. And for Rob, myself, I'm very active on Twitter. I use the handle Zehicle, Zehicle, and you can, ask me questions, interact with me, argue with me, please, about how these technologies are being built. I'm always asking these questions about taming complexity and how the big clouds are operating, and do we have the transparency? Are they being done right and looking to the future? Those are really important things, and I love to discuss them and interact with people on Twitter about it.
I've got to ask, Zehicle, is there a story behind that, behind your Twitter handle?
There is. Back in the day, I was very excited about electric cars. I actually did an electric car conversion, proved to myself, sadly, that there was no business in doing electric car conversions. That's where I actually started my blogging career. But Zehicle is a reference to a zero emission vehicle. So Z for zero and vehicle. Yeah. So that was a handle I picked up in my electric car days.
I absolutely love that. And so much we've covered today. And I think there's a lot of business leaders looking to find that control, consistency and choice over their infrastructure. And we are at the time of the year where everyone's kind of optimistic about the road ahead. So choosing Everything is Awesome is a great way to start the year. But thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and share your story too. Thank you, Rob.
Neil, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So a huge thank you to Rob for joining us on the podcast today, talking about why he is a strong advocate for lean, agile processes, and why he believes developers are often developing infrastructure incorrectly. A big talking point there. So if you are a developer, please send over your thoughts, insights, experiences to me at techblogwriter@outlook.com. And I also have a small favour to ask of you, because it's that time of the year again where I want to try and get some fresh ratings and reviews for the podcast to help the show battle against the algorithms. And the reason being is if all the reviews are from 2021 and here we are in 2022, it looks like nobody's listening anymore. So we need to get the algorithms back on side. And I think Spotify are soon allowing ratings on their platform. You hit the 3 little dots next to the show and it should allow you to leave a rating. And Apple Podcasts also make it nice and easy if you subscribe to just hit the rating and review. And if you do leave a rating or review, please take a screenshot. Send it to me at techblogwriter@outlook.com or LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter at Neil C. Hughes, and I'll read it out and give you a shout out. How does that sound? It's a fair trade, right? If not, don't worry. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. So I invite you to join me again tomorrow where we'll do it all again. But thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.